Hello everyone, my name is Pat Dudgeon. I'm very honoured to do the acknowledgement of country for the I-ASIST launch. So on behalf of this very important launch taking place from all different locations across Australia, I'd like to acknowledge Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, the First Nations people of this country. I am calling in from beautiful Wajak Noongar Budja, that's Perth in Western Australia. I'm from the Bardi people of the Northwest Coast. I acknowledge all the different Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander groups that make up our diverse and rich population. I acknowledge the continuing culture of the oldest living culture on earth. I acknowledge the resilience of our peoples who've survived and thrived during a past of colonisation. I acknowledge the strength and richness. I acknowledge our elders, past, present, and emerging. And finally, I would also like to acknowledge the strength and support of our allies, very important, who stand with us in our endeavours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Dudgeon. And I can tell you that the honour is all ours. Thank you so much for opening up this official launch of the LivingWorks I-ASIST program. My name's Shane Connell. I'm the CEO of LivingWorks Australia. And my role today is not only to MC, but is to be one of those allies that you talk about, Professor Dudgeon. It's been my role at LivingWorks, and in fact, all of LivingWorks' role throughout the 5-year development of this I-ASIST program, is to act as that ally and to be there in support and stand alongside everyone involved and the community who's led this program. I'm here today on Dudgeon country, and as you would have seen in the opening slides, we invite you all, whether you're joining with us here on Zoom, whether you're watching along on Facebook Live, here across the many nations within Australia, or indeed from any other country around the world. If you'd like, within the chat function, please just enter the Indigenous nation that you're joining with us from today. Also invite you to use the Q&A function. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, truly incredible. I'm blown away by the leadership and the involvement that we had and the support for this program. And so please use the Q&A function to submit any questions, and we will do our very best to get all of those answered throughout the course of this launch. We'd also like to invite you to engage with us online. We are very pleased, and again, it is our honour to have Dr. Summer May Finlay working with us and taking over the LivingWorks account, so she'll be tweeting live. And if you'd like to share your support or anything really about the LivingWorks I-ASIST launch today, please use that hashtag I-ASIST launch 2021. We'd love to see all that come through. As I mentioned, incredible list of speakers today. We have the Honourable Ken Wyatt, AM, Minister for Indigenous Australians. We have the Honourable Linda Burney, Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, and we are grateful to them both for their time. Obviously, Professor Pat Dudgeon will be joining our panel. We'll hear more from her later, and I'm very excited by that. We have Tom Brideson, CEO of Gayaa Dhuwi, Proud Spirit, joining us. Christine Morgan, CEO of the National Mental Health Commission, also. We have Dean Bayliss, the CEO of HealingWorks Australia and a proud I-ASIST trainer, joining us on a panel later on. We have Tegan Schefe, also an I-ASIST trainer. I'm glad to have Tegan with us. And Michelle Gissara as well, who is a youth representative, will be joining our panel. And we have Simon Pont today, who's representing Suicide Prevention Australia. So that's our lineup. Let's get moving and keep going. We just want to acknowledge from the outset, though, that if anything today raises any concerns for you, please look after yourselves. We are talking about suicide and its prevention, and we know that sometimes that may bring up some emotions for people. So we're going to, in the chat, just pop in some resources for people, and we just want to make that reminder right at the beginning for those of us joining in, for those with the lived or living experience and all the wisdom that brings. We also want to make sure that people are looking after themselves. So please do that throughout the course of this launch. Our first speaker today is the driving force behind LivingWorks I-ASIST, and personally a mentor of mine. Professor Maree Toombs is a proud Thirrili and Cooma woman and University of Queensland Associate Dean of Indigenous Engagement at the Faculty of Medicine. From her experience teaching Indigenous students, Maree observed a pattern in young Indigenous Australians disengaging from education and has worked ever since to understand and help bridge the gap. Maree's expertise is in the mental health and suicide prevention of Indigenous Australians and exploring the interface between Indigenous and Western research methodologies. Maree is a member of the Australian Medical Council, an advisory board member for Darling Downs Health Services, and the current chair of the Kabul Medical Service. This year, Maree was awarded the National Suicide Prevention Australia Life Award for impact for her work on I-ASIST. As I say, she's been the driving force behind the development of I-ASIST, and I can say from personal experience, I feel like I've done a master's in community engagement and consultation in just working alongside Maree for the last 5 years. She's certainly one to keep us all accountable to the needs of those community members. Welcome, Maree.
Thank you very much, Jane. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are all meeting on today. I'm on the beautiful Turrbal and Yagara lands on this place known as Meanjin, otherwise called Brisbane. I'm a Kradurali Ikuma woman, as mentioned, and I also want to acknowledge that we are the oldest surviving civilization on the planet, dating 60 to 100,000 years. We're the oldest storytellers. We are the oldest, have the oldest kinship systems and that deep connection to family and country. In terms of suicide, we did not have a word for suicide in any language group that I can find. And it's only been just over 40 years since we started to see suicide in our communities. So I came into this space through doing what I do best, and that's yarning with people. So I love story. I love to hear and learn through that age-old process. And in 2013, I did a big driving trip out to southwestern Queensland, but also down to the border, crossing over into New South Wales. And I just wanted to get a feel from communities about where they saw their biggest health needs or community needs and what those gaps were. And overwhelmingly, it was all around youth suicide, and it was around mental health and how they were attributing to other comorbidities as well. And so it was with the blessing of these communities that I was given permission to seek funding to do something about the mental health piece, but likewise in suicide. And so fortunately, we were successful in a grant in 2014, and it was to develop and design with communities an Aboriginal suicide intervention training program. And so that's really how the journey commenced. But what I found during that yarning and sitting down with Maud was, instead of initially designing a program, it was about identifying what was missing within communities in terms of how we were going to support communities to reduce suicide. And what people were saying is, and one elder in particular said to me, our kids don't kill themselves between the hours of 9 and 5. And what she meant by that was we couldn't rely on services to be there all the time to help us when we were worried about somebody at risk of suicide. And so this program really was about how can we design something that sits in the community with community, that gives the communities the skills to know what to do when they're sitting with someone that in that moment is thinking about suicide. And that's really what I-ASIST is. Through the community engagement process, we did design and develop this program, but it was wrapped around an existing whitefella program called I-ASIST. And the reason we did that was firstly because I came across ASIST and did the training back in 2016 when I first met Shane Connell. And it was during that training that I became very aware that my own brother was at risk of suicide. And whilst I knew it, I didn't know what to do about it. And I found that the framework for ASIST was really intuitive, and it spoke to the way that we as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples do things. So, you know, we ask direct questions, we hear story, we yarn, and we support each other. And that was really the premise of me almost stalking poor old Shane around how we could build this into something that could work for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And I'll just ask for the slide to be shared on what we landed on. Okay, so through our community engagement and over 90 communities that we have worked with, we landed on this model. And so the first piece is always going to be our age-old protocol of, who we are, where we come from, and that community engagement piece. And we've had multiple examples where this could take 2 to 3 months before we land on a workshop in a community, because we need to know who that community is, what that community wants, whether they even want us there. But it's a respectful approach to taking the program into community. Secondly, community members wanted to have a piece prior to the training that connected them to each other, that connected them to us as the trainers, but it was also a space and a place for people to debrief, because I can't name a single person that I have trained or have come across who is Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander who hasn't been directly impacted by suicide. So this was an opportunity to prepare people for what was coming the next day, and the next 2 days, which is talking about suicide. And we didn't want to traumatize people. So that's why that community connection piece is part of it. Then we have the 2-day workshop. But the most exciting piece about this and the innovative piece is the ongoing support. So we're really working towards developing a network where our trainers and our participants can come together and debrief and share story in a safe place to keep everybody safe in this space. And it occurred to me the other day that, we are first responders. And if you think about other first responders like our police and ambulance and fireys, etc., we know that those people also have a higher risk and rate of suicide. So this is really about supporting our trainers, supporting our responders, those people who have done the training. And it's also part of building a business model around our trainers so that we are giving back. There's reciprocity. You do the training, we'll provide a business model around you, we'll set you up to succeed as a sole trader and run your own businesses off the back of I-ASIST. And so that's the outline of this program. You'll hear a lot more about it as we go through today, and particularly with the panel. But what I'd like to do now is introduce you to a video that we pulled together, which describes the power of this training and the power of every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person's voice that has led and landed on this magnificent program.
So my daughter's name is Pia, and Pia was 32 when she died. Mental health was a tough one, and I didn't have any assist training exposure. If you've got asthma, you know where to go. If you've got diabetes, you know where to go. But if you're in trauma and suicide thoughts, you have nowhere to go. The others may take your life in time, but this one takes your life in moments.
Hi, my name's Maree Toombs, and today I'm very proud to introduce you to a world-first Indigenous-led suicide intervention training program. This program came about through an NHMRC grant that we spent the past 4 years working with communities nationally and have landed on this amazing program that we call I-ASIST. I-ASIST came about through initially getting some funding through the National Health and Medical Research Council to look at a way to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to reduce the rates of suicide.
The big issues that are confronting us is the high rates of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide.
We understand that our mob are dying by suicide.
It was during my time doing the non-Indigenous version of I-ASIST that I became very, very aware that my own brother was at risk of suicide. Through doing the program, I was actually able to conduct an intervention on him, and it gave me the tools that I needed to understand what to do. Once I realised the capacity of this program, I bugged the daylights out of LivingWorks, and particularly Shane Connell, to see if we could work with this program in Aboriginal communities.
At LivingWorks, we are incredibly proud of the development of I-ASIST. Not only because of the life-saving skills that will be able to be delivered for communities across Australia, but because I-ASIST is truly co-designed and community-led.
We took the program into multiple communities across Australia, and we spoke to the framework of the program, which is really intuitive to the way that we do culture.
It was on a level that they totally knew and could relate to.
There's Indigenous leadership, it's grounded in Indigenous knowledges.
I-ASIST enables skills to be taught in a culturally safe and inclusive environment. It teaches the skills to save lives.
I-ASIST is designed for Indigenous people or those closely supporting Indigenous people through its unique protocols and cultural nuances. It provides a vastly better learning experience, resulting in positive engagement.
It speaks of story, it speaks of deep listening, and it speaks of empowering the individual and the community to work together to keep somebody safe from suicide.
The education, it gave people the knowledge of being able to ask, like, are you okay? Of notice that you're different to how you normally are.
I think once people know when you're either a trainer or trained in this, you're then a person that they can go to.
It's really taught me to be able to use my ears and listen, and to be able to sit in people's pain and be able to respond in an effective manner. And I have been able to save a number of lives so far.
When you're in that moment with somebody and you're not sure of what to say or what to do this training, because it will help you and it will help save lives.
See, I-ASIST is a tool that we can take back to our mob and take back to our community and train them to be confident and to be ready to provide an intervention to prevent suicide.
The wonderful thing about this program is it's the first of its kind in the world, but two, it's a social enterprise model.
It will create employment opportunities for Indigenous trainers to be able to work within their communities, to be a resource in developing these skills.
This program is a celebration of the efficacy and self-determination that Aboriginal peoples have, and how we, when we come together collectively, are able to do great things.
We applaud the continuation of I-ASIST, and it will make a difference for our communities.
It provides a holistic way to approach suicide so that one day we can say that we have zero suicide in our communities.
Wow, I can't watch that without getting goosebumps. Actually, that's incredible. Thank you so much, Professor Toombs, Maree. for that overview of an incredible program. And I get goosebumps because when we talk about leadership, Indigenous leadership, we're talking, of course, about leaders like those that you will hear from today, but actually the whole community. And so, what a privilege it's been to be part of that development. Our next speaker continues this theme of leadership for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across the country. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Tom Brideson, the CEO of Gayaa Dhuwi, Proud Spirit. So Tom is a Kamilaroi man born in Gunnedah, northwest New South Wales, and a member of the Red Schefe local Aboriginal Land Council. In April 2020, Tom was appointed Chief Executive Officer of Gayaa Dhuwi, Proud Spirit Australia, the culmination of more than 25 years' work in Indigenous mental health and health policy, social and emotional wellbeing, clinical mental health care, suicide prevention, education, and mental health leadership. Tom sits on multiple committees under the 5th National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan to improve the health and mental health of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Tom believes that to build solutions to the wellbeing and mental health challenges facing many Indigenous people in Australia, the country needs effective jurisdictional cooperation, an improved evidence base, and of course, a fit-for-purpose workforce to meet the unique cultural and other needs. Thank you, Tom.
My name is Tom Brideson. I'm a Kamilaroi man from northwest New South Wales. I'm the CEO of Gayaa Dhuwi, Proud Spirit Australia, and a Deputy Commissioner at the New South Wales Mental Health Commission. Thank you, Pat, for your acknowledgement of country, Maree for your opening statement, and Minister Wyatt for officially launching I-ASIST. I acknowledge the other speakers here today, Christine Morgan from the National Mental Health Commission as the CEO and the Suicide Prevention Advisor to the Prime Minister, Neves Maree, Suicide Prevention Australia CEO. Established in late March 2020, Gayaa Dhuwi, Proud Spirit Australia is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social and emotional wellbeing, mental health and suicide prevention national leadership body. It is governed and controlled by Indigenous people and peak bodies working in these areas, promoting collective excellence in mental health care. Gayaa Dhuwi, Proud Spirit Australia's vision is Indigenous leadership, excellence and presence across all parts of the Australian mental health system and the achievement of the highest attainable standard of social and emotional wellbeing, mental health and suicide prevention outcomes for Indigenous people. I-ASIST provides Indigenous leadership from research and development led by Professor Maree Toombs of the University of Queensland through to the Train the Trainer model, developing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership within communities and workplaces, providing community leadership. Suicide prevention training is the missing piece, which sits alongside mental health literacy in awareness initiatives. With the rates of Indigenous communities suicides in Indigenous communities twice that of non-Indigenous communities, we know that people seek help within community. I-ASIST trains friends and families and other outreach services to identify with suicidal thoughts early and use their skills to take immediate steps to deal with the situation. The need for training people within communities have been recommended for a long time. The pandemic highlighted this need in a much larger way. This model goes a long way to building the capacity in developing suicide prevention skills within communities where people live. I-ASIST contributes to fulfilling the recommendations for building capacity in Indigenous communities as outlined in the recent Productivity Commission report into mental health, the final advice to the Prime Minister by the Suicide Prevention Advisor, Christine Morgan, and the Victorian Royal Commission into mental health report. On behalf of Gayaa Dhuwi, Proud Spirit Australia, I welcome the launch of I-ASIST and look forward to supporting its full implementation across First Nations lands. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom. Really appreciate your support and your words. And it's a nice segue actually for our next speaker, Christine Morgan. Christine Morgan is the CEO of the National Mental Health Commission and National Suicide Prevention Advisor to Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Ms Morgan is a passionate leader in mental health care reform, committed to listening and responding to the voice and needs of those with lived experience. Christine brings connection and passion to mental health reform, built on the network she established in the corporate world, her broad legal expertise, her extensive not-for-profit experience, and a strong ability to demonstrate to people how their contribution can make a real difference. I know she's a strong ally for this work, and so welcome, Christine.
Thank you so much, Shane, and absolutely am I an ally for this work. In fact, more than an ally, this is the way we need to go for our genuine delivery on our commitment, our joint commitment to saving lives. But look, I'd like to firstly begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of all the lands upon which we're meeting today. For myself, I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney, where I'm reaching out to you from. I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also like to stop at this point before I even begin making any comments to acknowledge and respect the reality, the lived reality of so many of us around mental illness, mental ill health and suicide. They truly are issues that touch each and every one of us. It's the reason, in fact, we do the work we do. So thank you again for the opportunity of being here. And look, can I extend my personal congratulations, Shane, to yourself through LivingWorks, and most importantly, Maree, to the incredible work that you have led in a program where let's just stop and pause and realise will save lives. One of the most fundamental realities that I have had reminded to me over and over again, as I've had the privilege of working in this area of suicide prevention, is that at that time when somebody is at that point of real sense of despair and they have lost hope, the bridge that we not only need to build, but can build when each of us are involved is a bridge of connection, a bridge of hearing, a bridge of creating hope. And for each person who's come back from that brink, it has been someone who's cared, listened, and been alongside who has made that difference. This I-ASIST program absolutely will enable so many more of us, particularly people in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, to be alongside, be with, and to save their fellow human beings. And there's nothing more important than we can all do. When I look at the current agenda that we have at a national level across the spectrum of mental health and suicide prevention, I see a few things happening. Firstly, I see an increased awareness and an ease of speaking about issues associated with mental ill health and suicide. I see an acknowledgement that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been subjected to centuries of inequity, of disadvantage, of issues that have caused real pain, that have resulted in complex trauma, intergenerational trauma, and each and every one of us has an obligation to address that need and ensure that we build a future of hope. I see a commitment in our recent federal budget, which was $2.3 billion, bigger than we've ever had for mental health and suicide prevention, not only to recognising the specific needs around suicide prevention, but to also recognise, most importantly, that we have priority population groups that are disproportionately impacted by the reality of suicide and mental ill health. And front and centre of that are our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, our first Australians. We must and will be addressing that. I also see in that budget a commitment to equipping people in workforce situations, in communities where we live, where we learn and where we work, to actually have the skills to reach out to people. And that includes a commitment to our peer workforce. When we were doing our national suicide prevention advice, and I always at this time acknowledge the tremendous work of Dr. J. Scahan, who was our special advisor at that time, who led this work. It was incredibly important to J. the expert advisory group, and myself, that we were at all times not only informed by the voices of lived experience, but led by the voices of lived experience. The work we did in Compassion First was our gateway to trying to understand, are there any patterns or journeys that we can identify that will better inform how we can intervene at points of distress for people and really see if we can stop that trajectory to suicide. In doing that work, we heard from over 2,000 people, including wonderful yarning circles of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And certainly one of the 8 journeys that we were able to very lightly identify, because each journey, of course, into suicide is unique to the individual, was that of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and peoples. There really is an enormous amount of historical factors as well as very real-time factors that have created circumstances of vulnerability to suicide. So we were informed by real voices. What I'm really loving about the I-ASIST program is that building on having heard from lived experience about those factors that lead to suicidality, suicidal behaviour, suicidal crisis, suicidal loss, those voices also inform how we can build hope, how we can save lives, how we can turn this around as we all strive towards our goal of towards zero suicides. One of the wonderful things that has come from the work we've been able to do over the last couple of years and announced in the federal budget is the establishment of Australia's first National Suicide Prevention Office. I can absolutely swear to the fact that we will carry into that office a genuine commitment to working with people with lived experience. As we go through our first key priorities, which will include a national strategy, which must align and accord with and support the work being led by Tom and his team at Dhuwi for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide prevention strategies. We build that strategy. As we will build a workforce strategy for suicide prevention, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will be front and centre, as will, of course, the I-ASIST program. As we build the capacity to better understand suicide, to collect data, we must always continue to work with people with lived experience, but I'm always particularly joyful when I have opportunities to work across with people such as Tom and others, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues and partners as we work together. So congratulations again to all who've been involved in the I-ASIST program, particularly, as I say, Maree, for your inspiration, for the fact that you didn't let up on Shane, and Shane, thank you that you didn't allow anybody at LivingWorks to be anything but other than committed. So congratulations, and we really look forward to supporting your goals of building this over the next 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words, Christine. We really appreciate you being here today and your support, and we certainly look forward to all the work that's going to come out of the office and your continued focus on including and lifting and elevating those lived experience perspectives. So thank you. Before we introduce our next speaker, I just want to acknowledge a few people behind the scenes that have been involved in the development of I-ASIST, in particular the artist, Susie Klein, who developed the beautiful artwork that you see today on the images, the slides, and also the participant materials that we use with I-ASIST. Susie has been an incredible advocate for us. She's one of the early I-ASIST trainers, along with Kay Lutt, who was featured and shared her story so generously in the I-ASIST video that you saw earlier. So thank you, Susie and Kay. Thank you as well to the team at University of Queensland, people like Wayne Williams, who was instrumental in the development of the program, and of course, Dr. Bushra Nazir as well, working alongside Professor Toombs. I also want to acknowledge people like Trish Mailing and Gavin Cohen in the Northern Territory in Darwin, as part of the top-end suicide intervention and awareness training program, who have been delivering the training like this in LivingWorks programs for many, many years and really pioneered that work. And thank you as well to those who have provided seed funding. We've mentioned, of course, the NHMRC grant that Professor Toombs spoke about, but also Darling Downs West Moreton PHN, the Northern Territory PHN, and the Hunter New England Central Coast PHN across those 3 states, who are also involved in seed funding, helping to develop some of the program and those initial pilot field trial workshops. So thank you all for your support. Our next speaker representing Suicide Prevention Australia is Simon Pont. And Simon, with a background in social work, has close to 20 years experience working in clinical healthcare and healthcare leadership. He has experience as a conjoint lecturer with the University of Newcastle and as a casual academic. Simon is the Director of Quality Systems and Practice with Suicide Prevention Australia, and he leads the National Suicide Prevention Research Fund and Australia's first, in fact, I believe it's the world's first, suicide prevention accreditation program. At LivingWorks, we're very proud to be one of the first organisations to engage in this QIP program, and it's great to have you here, Simon.
Thank you, Shane, for those warm words of welcome and for the invitation to be part of the launch of I-ASIST today. Apologies, Nevis Maree, CEO of Suicide Prevention Australia, was unable to join us today. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Wabakal people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the importance of lived experience and all those who we have lost to suicide. Suicide Prevention Australia, as many of you joining us today would be aware, has close to 400 members, including the largest and many of the smallest suicide prevention and mental health organisations across Australia. And as the peak body for suicide prevention, it's days like today that make me and the team proud of the amazing achievements that are occurring across the sector. Suicide Prevention Australia has a close connection to this training, as we've heard before, as Professor Maree Toombs was the 2021 recipient of the Suicide Prevention Life Award. Back in September on World Suicide Prevention Day, Professor Toombs was recognised in the impact category for her work developing I-ASIST. The other connection we have to I-ASIST is that it's currently undergoing accreditation via our Suicide Prevention Accreditation Program. The Suicide Prevention Accreditation Program supports organisations to implement safe, high quality and effective suicide prevention and post-prevention programs in Australia. We are striving to ensure that every person who needs support can access a consistent, high quality and safe standard of care. Programs and services accredited or working towards accreditation, like I-ASIST, are listed on the National Best Practice Directory on our website. We can't underestimate the importance of evidence-based interventions for suicide prevention. And it's wonderful to see the strong evidence base backing and informing the methodology behind I-ASIST. It is a tragedy in this country that there are high rates of suicide among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It's important to remember that suicide is complex. This sort of gatekeeper training is important for early intervention. We know the first time someone shares their experience of distress is a critical moment for their support journey. Having the suicide first aid skills of a program like I-ASIST is vital. As the peak body for suicide prevention, we've been advocating for programs specifically targeted to and led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in partnership with the community. I-ASIST is a wonderful example of this. Having services that are delivered in a culturally safe environment by culturally competent people in a culturally competent way are essential. As a member-based organisation, we work closely with members representing the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, the Centre for Best Practice in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and Gayaa Dhuwi are key members who help guide our work and our direction in government relations. In closing, I want to extend my congratulations to LivingWorks and Professor Maree Toombs for bringing this 2.5-day skills training program to life, and also the investment in Indigenous communities and their trainers. The launch of I-ASIST is an important step towards a world without suicide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Simon. It's so important that the peak organisation for suicide prevention in Australia is taking that lead on. And so thank you for being here and supporting the launch of I-ASIST. We're going to change gears a little bit now. We're going to open up for a panel conversation and discussion with some of our lead guests and some new guests that are joining us. And so let me introduce those who are joining us for the first time. We have, of course, Professor Pat Dudgeon, who opened up this morning, but I didn't get a chance to formally introduce her. So Professor Dudgeon was born and raised in Darwin and is descended from the Bardi people in the Kimberley, as well as being the director of the Centre of Best Practice in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide prevention. She's also a chief investigator on an NMHC Million Minds mission grant, transforming Indigenous mental health and wellbeing. Professor Dudgeon has published extensively in Indigenous mental health, social and emotional wellbeing, and suicide prevention. She's a fellow of the Australian Psychological Society and has served on many boards and councils. She's currently a board member of the Indigenous Australian Psychologists Association and of Gayaa Dhuwi Proud Spirit Australia. She's a former commissioner of the Australian National Mental Health Commission, and I know she won't mind me saying that she is joined today by her research assistant and her cat, Gucci. Thank you, Pat. Second, I'd like to introduce a very special guest, and we are very honoured to have her with us today, the Honourable Linda Burney, Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians. There's a lot of firsts in this launch, and there's plenty of firsts here as well. As a proud member of the Wiradjuri Nation, Linda was the first Aboriginal person to be elected to the New South Wales Parliament and the first Aboriginal woman to serve in the Australian House of Representatives. Linda was one of the first Aboriginal students to graduate from Mitchell College, which is now named as Charles Sturt University, with a teaching degree in the late 70s. Linda was part of the establishment of the first Aboriginal education unit within the New South Wales State Department of Education. In this role, Linda assisted in creating the first ever Aboriginal education policy in New South Wales, which set the template and ongoing standards for Aboriginal education across Australia. Linda's achievements are clearly demonstrated over 3 years of continuous commitment, championing Aboriginal rights in education, reconciliation, and politics. Linda has contributed significantly to the development of Indigenous communities locally, regionally, and nationally as an educator, championing reconciliation in Australia, and now as Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians. We really welcome you. Thank you for being here, Linda.
Thank you.
Let me introduce Michelle Gissara, who's a proud Kardu Diminin woman who grew up in Karndenya and now resides in Naarm, Victoria. Michelle graduated from RMIT University with a Bachelor of Criminology in Psychology in 2020 and a Bachelor of Justice in Criminology in 2021. Well, talk about a high achiever. Michelle's currently at Victoria University as a postgraduate master's student and part of the Wisdom of the Elders project, capturing an intergenerational oral history of the Victorian Koori courts. She's exploring how judicial-built environments facilitate cultural safe and responsive justice approaches, as well as foster connections to country. She has lived experiences of mental ill health and suicide and wishes to use those experiences to help mob break down negative stigmas and stereotypes, and is a natural network member of the Indigenous Lived Experience Centre with the Black Dog Institute. Michelle actually is also an actor that features on one of the I-ASIST training videos, and so we were thrilled that she agreed to be on this panel today. Welcome, Michelle. I'd also like to welcome Dean Bayliss, proud Kamilaroi man and the CEO of LivingWorks Australia. Dean has extensive experience within suicide prevention and postvention, including roles within the Wayback Suicide Aftercare Program, co-design, development and service delivery of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Suicide Aftercare Program, and suicide prevention with community-led emotional wellbeing and healing events. He also has significant experience in program co-design, strategic suicide intervention program development and delivery. Additionally, he has been contributing member of multiple suicide prevention networks, including Lifespan here in Newcastle. He is currently a national network member for the Black Dog Institute Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Lived Experience Centre, a national advisory member for the iBobbly app, and a national consortium member on behalf of LivingWorks Australia for HealingWorks Australia for LivingWorks I-ASIST. I've had the pleasure of working with Dean since he attended a TPT last year. He's an incredible trainer, a master LivingWorks I-ASIST trainer, assist and safe talk trainer, and welcome, Dean. Glad to have you. And finally, Tegan Schefe, but definitely not last or least. Tegan is a proud Gissara and Kamilaroi woman living and working on Gabba Gabba country. She is passionate about the importance of best practice protocols used to build better community capacities for individuals, families and communities. Tegan advocates for finding effective and sustainable suicide prevention, intervention and post-prevention strategies through consultation with the community that they aim to benefit. Tegan has established and maintained excellent relationships with community government and NGO services to support research and community-based initiatives to improve Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's mental health and wellbeing. Her engagement with the community has driven the delivery of a co-designed suicide prevention program for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, the first program of its kind for Queensland's Sunshine Coast. Tegan is a LivingWorks I-ASIST trainer, and it's great as well to have you on board. Please, of course, welcome back Christine and Professor Toombs to join our panel.
Hey, wow. I'm feeling a little bit humbled by the crew that I have around me. So this is going to be a great session. For everybody online, hi Gucci as well. He may make an appearance, Pat's cat. But as is protocol and the way that we do things as mob is yarning. So I really encourage people online to throw some questions at the panel. and I'll do my best to navigate that space. I'm not very good at doing two things at once, but I will have a red hot go at it. So I guess to start off, and I'll throw this to the panel and not to anybody directly. So if you want to jump in and respond to this question, yeah, just picking up on Christine's points about, you know, the trauma, and that suicide is grounded in loss. It's grounded in hopelessness, and it's grounded in looking back into the past. It's actually not about looking forward. And so my question to you is, how do we turn this around? Like, yes, we have I-ASIST, but it's at the end point of where our people's at. And we don't want people at this point where we're wrapping an intervention around them to keep them alive. So to the panel, how do we address this piece about trauma? Like, how do we really take this back to grassroots to make a change? Because as I mentioned at the start, we didn't even have a word for suicide. So this is grounded in colonisation. So I'll leave it there and see who'd like to pick that one up. Pat?
Oh, I'm happy just to kick off, just briefly though, more to break the ice. I mean, you've nailed it though, Maree, and I'm glad that message is being listened to now, but we know that Indigenous suicide is different. We're not the only ones with these incredibly elevated rates of suicide. So, you know, we've had meetings with other Indigenous people from other countries, and they too have elevated suicide rates. So our suicide is different. It is part of the story of colonisation and all the terrible things that happen to our people. So we are in need of healing and recovery, or recovery and healing. We're also in need of equality and recognition of our cultural difference. So there needs to be a lot that's had to happen to bring about, you know, an environment where Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people feel equal, feel respected, and have their culture respected. That is starting to happen. I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation here, when I started working in the area, it was very difficult to have a voice, to have Indigenous suicide recognised as different. And certainly Indigenous leadership was very scarce. So, you know, I'm sitting back here, I've listened and tweeted out Christine Morgan's wonderful tweet, but I'm looking at Linda and I'm looking at Tegan and Dean and yourself thinking, isn't this fantastic? We're on the road now. And I think the I-ASIST program, being a national program, will empower our communities and capacity build our people. So I think that things are starting to change. I've seen the narrative change. So it all goes well, but it isn't. It's a very complicated, and I think Christine said it earlier, I rather like that. It is complex and complicated, but we're starting to sort it. But that's a little from me.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Linda.
Thanks, Maree, and hi, Pat. How are you? Hello to everyone, and I'm very pleased to be part of this panel, and congratulations to all of you that have worked on this incredible program. And good to, I've not met you, Christine, but we must catch up at some point in time.
Absolutely, Linda. I so look forward to that.
Look, a couple of things, Maree. It seems to me, and Pat touched on it, as have other speakers, that a part of the answer to your question is about giving people the skills and communities the skills that they can actually do something about this. Because as Pat's hinted at, you know, so much of what's happened to Aboriginal people, you know, it just gets to be part of the narrative. The worst suicide rates, the worst domestic violence rates, the worst outcomes in all of the social justice areas. And I'm speaking to you as a member of parliament, but also as a mum that's lost a son to suicide. And it seems to me that part of the answer to your question is giving people the skills to be able to intervene, to not feel, oh, I better not say something, it might be the wrong thing, it might set them off, but to actually empower people to feel that they've got some control over the situation. But the other thing that I really encourage, it seems to me that part of this in its wholeness is giving families the skills or assisting families after the suicide. Because, you know, that can be the most difficult time. And I remember very clearly when my son took his own life, one of his cousins said to me, oh, Auntie took a bullet for me. And that cousin has subsequently hung himself. So there is this lack of, for our young people, this lack of being able to see a future, to imagine a future. And for any young person with that view of life, it is a tragedy. And it's for all of the reasons that we've heard about so far. But in essence, it's about giving people the skills and the confidence to intervene like you did with your brother, but to also not blame yourself. I think that's really important.
Thank you so much, Linda, for that. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've learned through being in this space is sometimes you can see someone's at risk of suicide and it is very visible. And then other times you're never going to pick it up, you know, but it's that aftercare piece that you're talking about, which I think is so important. That's throwing me now, sorry. I don't know, Dean, did you want to jump in just in terms of that aftercare support piece? Oh, mute.
Unmute, Dean.
$10 in the cookie, in the mute jar. So firstly, thank you, Linda, for sharing your experience in your bereavement suicide. I've worked extensively in aftercare, both mainstream models, and we developed a co-designed Indigenous specific aftercare program with the support of the Hunter and New England Central Coast PHN. And what we found, and as Pat Dudgeon's got some amazing resources on the Centre of Best Practice regarding this, when our people go to emergency services or taking up, our people don't know how to do an intervention or have the skills, and there's a lot of fear due to sorry business, a constant wave of deaths within our communities. Our people get taken up to mental health units or to ED units, and there's a transfer of trauma continually because we project our what's happened in the past. We might become combative, and then even be excluded from aftercare programs due to dangerousness, pushed back into the community, back to the people that families have the fear and the shame, and the people going back into the communities with shame and fear. And it's just a cycle of despair that continues. I've worked in this aftercare, and at no time did anybody think to support the families by training them in any intervention training. And many of these people came back representations up to 4 or 5 times. And it's quite scary when we're working in silo and feeling that the only people who can support these people are people working in services. These same skills at I-ASIST are the same skills that people in aftercare programs have to have mandatory to work for employment. They're the same skills that the crisis line workers have to take calls. So I'm so very proud to be able to go into communities on a community level, provide supports and get trainers in those communities so we're not flying in, flying out with people off country, Indigenous people off country. So it's an amazing product. It's an amazing social enterprise model. It's not just a training model, it's a model to get community, in community, for community, and so it's great and sustainable. So that's what I've experienced within my time.
To raise is where we're developing these programs, we're trying to get to a point where we can directly have conversations about suicide and almost normalize those conversations so that, you know, young people, our communities more broadly can see this as not being a taboo topic. But one of the barriers that I've really seen in this space is trying to engage with our kids around talking about suicide. And so I'm interested in people's opinions, but I'm just going to give you a little scenario that happened to me. So got this funding for I-ASIST, put an ethics application into Education Queensland here in Queensland, and got this very sort of covert, whispery phone call. It was like, hey, is this more Toombs? And I'm like, yes. And it was basically the head of ethics telling me that I needed to withdraw that application and that by doing so, I wouldn't get a big, you know, cross against my name if I wanted to work with education in the future. So I know that that's starting to shift a little bit, but if we can't educate our kids and have our kids looking out for each other as well, then, you know, I think that's also a problem. So I might actually ask Michelle if she'd like to respond as our Indigenous youth rep today.
Thank you. You kind of took the words out of my mouth a little bit. I did have some things written down because I get a little bit nervous when I speak in public, but I literally had that we need to build, you know, speaking of suicide or mental health into everyday conversation, make this taboo topic not taboo. So you took the words right out of my mouth. But I think, you know, especially to kind of target our young mob and, you know, create safe spaces to yarn, you also need to make sure that you're being intersectional in the ways that you do your approaches. So thinking about gender, thinking about sexuality, thinking about disability, and making sure that you're being really inclusive in your approaches, and it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach. So I'm an Indigenous woman, I'm bisexual, I have chronic illness, so you know, how you talk to me, how you speak to me is going to be different to speaking to a straight male, an able-bodied male. So yeah, I think just really making sure that it's not just something that's going to fit everybody exactly, and that there's certain nuances in that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I think the piece I'm picking up in there is listening without judgment, so hearing without bias, and giving you and others the dignity to tell their story without, you know, being a mum and going, what do you mean, and cutting in and actually, yeah, being able to do that. Does anybody else want to jump in around, yeah, youth suicide? Because I mean, it's the scourge of the nation, and it's not just here in Australia. We know that it's international, and I know that we've got people here today from the US and Canada and New Zealand as well. So if there's others out there, let me know. But yeah, just thanks, Christine.
Thanks. And if I can, and Linda, I actually, we haven't properly met, but I did have the privilege of hearing you at the winter solstice down in Albury last year. So I've heard the story of yourself, and it was so moving, and I acknowledge that. And I think to your point that you made, Linda, and thank you, Michelle, you've said it, and Maree, I think it is young people have an incredible need to be able to visualize a positive future. It's a foundational piece. We know, as you have said, Maree, that point of despair, that point of crisis is when you have lost hope. I also see it as a point of real disconnection. And so the flip side to me, and I don't mean to ever simplify it, but is we must build connection. And for young people, I think that truly means connection, not only to culture, not only to identity, not only to community, but connection to a vision of a future where they belong and where they can contribute, and where, but for their contribution, the world's going to be a poorer place. Now, I know that's a big aspirational statement, but I genuinely think and we're looking at this in the Commission at the moment, about what are these underlying factors that are really seeing significant increases in mental ill health and suicidal ideation and self-harm in our young people, including our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people. And there is a real misalignment between how we present the world and how they experience the world. So I think it's that turning the disconnection into connection, and including in that connection a sense of connectedness to a future that they can identify with. Sounds aspirational, but I really think it is that critical that we do that.
Can I share something on that? I went home recently, and part of it was about, going home to see how my family were traveling. So we've recently lost somebody this year to suicide, and it's affected our family in a big way. So part of going home was, asking those questions about, what is it that's not working in smaller communities, especially where there's those family relationships of, our mob might work in the local AMS or, at the schools and things like that. So how do we have those conversations between ourselves, but also to share that, it's not about, we've got to build those relationships around trust and rapport. One of the things that come out of the conversations, we've spent many years talking about how do we keep our old people well, and, working through chronic disease management myself. We talk about a person with diabetes and how we support them through their GP management plan, getting their blood sugar levels down and all of that stuff. So so the other thing was, how do we help our young grow old? Because we're seeing too many of our young people die by suicide. So what is it that we can do in this space to, reconnect our kids back to our culture, but also reconnecting back into the community? Because there's so many of those contributing factors that don't get talked about. We know that they happen in those conversations after the suicide. They might have been drinking the night before, or they've had months on the grog and drugs and things like that. So these are things that, don't really get brought in the conversation about, what are we going to do about these things? Because those are the things that are in their life at that time. And for me, when I lost my cousin, there was a part of me that went, why didn't somebody call me? Because, she did call out for help that morning. But, it's not my family's fault that they don't have the skills and knowledge of what to do when that happens, because, somebody could be presenting to us with any kind of issue and we might just go, oh, she's just having another bad day. But, that night she took her own life. And then the next day you have these conversations about, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. But we're not blaming people. And that's the biggest thing that I'm seeing in this position that I sit within Thirrili, is that there's blame, there's the unanswered questions, there's all those things that come with it. So when I'm delivering a workshop of Indigenous ASIST, whether it's a non-Indigenous participant or an Indigenous participant, it's about educating on those things that, we bring ourselves into it because we are lived experience. We've lived this life. We've lived in our communities. We've worked with our mob. So we know when we're delivering this program in our communities, what we need to be teaching so that they can go back out and they can have these conversations and they can feel comfortable when they're in that moment. Because like in the video, it takes a life in moments. So I just wanted to share that.
One of the observations that I've seen in developing I-ASIST and being in community and then also delivering I-ASIST is there's gatekeepers within the gatekeepers. And so a community not too far from Brisbane here has about 90 services in it. Okay, population about 1,200, like local people that live in this community, Indigenous peoples, Aboriginal peoples. To get through those stakeholder organisations to get to the grassroots people that really and truly need this training is really difficult. And I'm talking to a non-Indigenous person about how I can run an I-ASIST program for the grassroots people of that community. Like, it's a really strange model. So I guess my question is, what do we do about that? Like, how do we get beyond that? And it's the piece to that first part of the protocol of I-ASIST, which is about that community capacity building and making connections, and that sometimes it can take 2 to 3 months to even get there. So just interested in that overload of not-for-profits that are gatekeeping. Linda?
Maree, was someone else queued before me?
Well, you
go, Pat.
Oh, okay, just quickly then. You know, we did the ATSIPAT project, the big Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander suicide prevention evaluation project. We launched it at Parliament House and Linda was actually there. So that was fabulous. And I think I'm pleased to say, I think that report was part of changing the dialogue about Indigenous suicide. But with it, we did these meta-analysis of programs, of the literature. We did a number of roundtables nationally to find out what works for Indigenous Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander suicide prevention. And the key things, even if you're adapting a program, is that it has to have an element of self-determination in it, which I-ASIST is doing. So you're not going in helicoptering programs onto the community. That's not going to be very effective. We need to all the big messages that came out was there needed programs and services needed to be owned by the community. They needed to have elements of self-determination. They needed to time needed to be taken, as yourself and others are doing, to establish the program too. So I think rushing in with quick fixes externally is not effective. So I think working with communities, them owning the program and ensuring that self-determination happens and culture is also respected in it are important elements. And that came up. They were the big messages from ATSIPAT.
Just very quickly, I have to go to another meeting, and thank you, Tegan, for your comments. They are just so real, and Christine would have heard me say this, but when a young person takes their life, you have to respect their decision. It's the hardest thing in the world to do, but that's part of it. Can I just go to the two things I want to say? Firstly, I think back, 65 next birthday, I think back for the last 10 years on where we were with the discussion in Aboriginal communities, and Pat and Dean, you all know what I'm talking about, Maree, that we didn't talk about domestic violence. But now, because people are coming out, people are forming groups, organisations, and First Nations people are part of the delivery of programs, it is now a normal conversation to have. And I think the issue of suicide is in many ways at the beginning of, not the beginning, I think we're down the track of where things were with the discussion on DV, because it is hard. Part of it is, individuals and communities taking responsibility. But this is really what I wanted to say, and then I'm afraid I have to leave, is this issue is a national crisis. We all agree on that. We know the statistics, and I very rarely say anything complimentary about our Prime Minister, but I think he is very serious about the issue of suicide. So there is the political imperative there that we need to seize upon. And the thing that I think is most important in a political sense is that this has to be above politics. This has to be something that there is bipartisan agreement and going forward together. Now, bipartisanship should not be a race to the bottom. It has to be about excellence. So those two things are important. And the final thing I'd say is that what you're really talking about is the power of place-based approaches. You know, I know communities like the one you're talking about where there are so many providers. They're all doing their own thing. Nobody talks to each other. And a family that's got a kid in trouble will have sticking into their lives 6 or 7 government agencies all at different times. That doesn't have to be the way. And it seems to me that one of the most powerful things we can do is advocate place-based approaches to this issue. And on that, I'm going to have to go. I'm really sorry.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, yeah, for your story, and yeah, hope to see you in person one day.
I'm around.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Minister Ken Wyatt will be joining us at 10 to 10 to, what time is it down there too? It's 10 to 1 here. So yeah, wherever you may be nationally today. So yeah, I think we can keep this conversation going. I've been looking in the chat to see yeah, if there's any direct questions. There's a beautiful one here to you, Tegan, saying you've inspired me before, and now as I'm living far away in WA, you've given me new tools to help me connect with the community I'm living in. There you go.
Yeah, that's Karen.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So our proposal for this program moving forward is that we train 50 T4Ts nationally, so 50 train the trainers, and that we aim to basically be able to get to 50,000 of our community members. And so whilst that stakeholder piece has a place in it, this is really about our community members. So from the expertise around the panel, is that possible? Is 50 trainers to 50,000 people over the next 3 years, is that possible? Is that enough? Do we need to do more? So just interested in feedback on that.
Yes, so I personally believe it is. HealingWorks Australia was co-founded with Linda Smith, and one woman who's joining us today on the Wabulgal country. It was actually founded on this social enterprise model. I went to the T4T and Shane was there, and he said, "You got to come to a PHN meeting with me next week. It's about I-ASIST, but it's Indigenous money, so you need to be there." So from day one, he took me there and we discussed that. And they actually paid for our trainings to be trained. And then we set up systems to have HealingWorks start. We've done numerous workshops and community engagement throughout Australia. And then now we're at the point that we're onboarding, and we've got funding from PHNs to do grants and co-grants with LivingWorks. And now we are putting our money back into the community and finding trainers to train them up. So I believe it is sustainable. We've got a great network of people. We've got, we're in talks with one of the leading banks. We've been told we can say we're in talks with one of the leading banks, financial institutions in Australia. We'll be able to support a social enterprise model, as well as other great organisations to help with grant writing and how to do business. So this will be far sustainable past any grant past only 3 years, this will be ongoing for these people to continue these relationships with their own PHNs and community.
And I think that's one of the most important things, Dean, is that this is a model which builds in its own sustainability. So Maree, I think whether a 50 is hit or whether it's more or whether it's less, 50 would be fantastic, 50,000 would be fantastic. But gosh, something which is then not dependent upon government funding, etc. Not because government shouldn't fund, I totally agree. I'm totally with Linda when she talks about this needs to be a bipartisan issue where we all rise up, we don't fall down to the bottom. But the reality is there are so many calls on government spending and on government funding. So I think to the extent that any model can have built into it a mechanism by which it can be sustainable itself, it's going to then reach more people. Now, of course, government funding is there to underwrite it, to support it, to actually make sure it can continue. But I just think that's where the momentum really comes. And as with any successful business, it's because it's got a fantastic product and it actually connects with people. So success breeds success. And I think that's the other thing, Maree. This is a program which, from everything I'm hearing, really resonates with people and with communities. They will want it, and that is the mark of what will become really successful.
Thank you. And I think the key point in that is business breeds business. And so for our trainers, we want them to know how to be business people. So we want them to know how they can chase dollars, how they can build a model around themselves and around their community. Simple things like budgets. You know, we might be the oldest storytellers in the world, but we're not the oldest bankers. And so it's about thinking about, well, where can we put training and, you know, upskilling, so we're not setting people up to fail. And we've seen that happen a lot in our communities. And so how can we build that network, that training, that business model, so we have these, you know, 50 trainers that know exactly how they can be sole traders, set themselves up, chase the funding, and build that efficacy around themselves and their communities. So to me, that's the bit that gets me super excited as well. I did have a beautiful question here from somebody in the chat who said, how can I go about doing the I-ASIST training? Well, funny you should ask. So within LivingWorks, we will have the names of our trainers once we get over today, where you can access that point. But likewise, as we build capacity around people like Dean and Tegan and others, it's really about then, you know, you guys can reach out directly through that process as well. So we're not being gatekeepering over our trainers as well. Okay, I can see that, our Federal Minister Ken Wyatt has just joined us. So I might hand back to Shane and just thank everybody for participating and all the beautiful chat conversations that have come through, and also like to thank everybody on the panel for participating.
Thanks so much, Maree, and thank you to all our panelists. I think for everyone watching and following along there, I'm sure you would like me as MC to express just how grateful we are for you for sharing your stories and being so involved. And speaking of grateful and an honour, it is my absolute honour to introduce the Honourable Ken Wyatt, AM, to officially launch I-ASIST. Ken was elected in 2010 as the federal member for Hasluck, an electorate southeast of Perth, making history as the first Indigenous member of the House of Representatives. In 2015, Ken again made history as the first Indigenous member of the Federal Executive, after being sworn in at the time as Assistant Minister for Health. Not only has Ken had an extensive career in health and education, he has also made an enormous contribution to the wider community in training and mentoring young people. This was recognised in 1996 when he was awarded the Order of Australia in the Queen's Birthday Honours List. In 2000, he was awarded a Centenary of Federation Medal for his efforts and contribution to improving the quality of life for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and mainstream Australian society in education and health. How fitting that he's with us today. He joins us today, of course, in his role as the Federal Minister for Indigenous Australians. And I have to say that Dean, Mark, Maree and I had the pleasure of meeting the Minister in his office earlier this year. and it was incredibly warm and engaging conversation. And I was struck by how deeply Minister knew this work and how supportive he was. And so pleased to officially launch the LivingWorks I-ASIST program. We welcome Minister Ken Wyatt.
Shane, thank you very much. Great to be with you all. Can I also acknowledge Maria Toombs for her work? Shane, your contribution over a period of time, Dean Bayliss for the work you've done, Professor Pat Dudgeon, who I've known for a long time. We've done a lot of work on this area, but someone who was important to me was Tom Brideson when I worked in New South Wales, and we talked about these challenges. And Christine Morgan, you've been a great advocate for the things that we need to do. To the Honourable Linda Burney, a long-time friend and colleague, and to Neves Maree for the work that you're doing. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak at the launch of the I-ASIST program. I'm joining you today from the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and the young leaders that are emerging. I also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners and custodians, and to you all on all the lands around the country that you are joining from today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the audience. For those of you joining us today who've been affected by the death of a loved one lost too soon to suicide, please accept my deepest and sincerest condolences. Suicide, as we know, is devastating for families and communities. Any death by suicide serves as a constant reminder for what more we need to be doing to give our young people hope for the future and support they need to overcome their darkest hours, or in some cases, moments. The fact that Indigenous people are dying by suicide at twice the rate of any other Australian is one of the most complex and urgent challenges we face as a nation, and we need to use every tool at our disposal to have a substantial impact. I thank Professor Toombs and LivingWorks Australia for all of your hard work over the past 7 years in developing the world's first suicide intervention skills training program for Indigenous Australians. This is an incredibly valuable resource, and I congratulate you on delivering this important work. I'd also like to congratulate Professor Toombs on receiving the Impact Award for I-ASIST at the 2021 Life Awards from the Governor-General, His Excellency the Honourable David Thirrili. This award recognises the effectiveness of I-ASIST in addressing, preventing and responding to suicidal behaviours. LivingWorks I-ASIST will be an important tool in closing the gap and ensuring a sustained reduction in the number of suicide deaths down to zero. As many would know, in 2020, all governments signed the new National Agreement on Closing the Gap with, for the first time, shared accountability, greater transparency and embedding work in partnership across all levels of government and the coalition of Aboriginal peak organisations. Target 14 is a significant and sustained reduction in suicide of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people towards zero, and is now the responsibility of all governments and all jurisdictions, because they must report annually on their progress to realising this target. I-ASIST is also supporting health carers for Indigenous trainers as they deliver first aid suicide skills to their local communities in a culturally appropriate and respectful way. I've always believed that the changes will come at community level. That is where the lived experience is and where the impact is the greatest. The trainers have a lived experience of suicide and bring with them knowledge and experience and empathy. We know that there is such a need to reach people in distress earlier to prevent the onset of suicidal behaviour. A focus on prevention and early intervention with a more integrated and compassionate mental health system is the key. Excuse me. The Morrison government heard these messages loud and clear through the Productivity Commission's inquiry report on mental health, the National Suicide Prevention Advisor's final advice, as well as the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system. For this reason, the 2021-22 budget included the single largest Commonwealth investment in mental health and suicide prevention in Australia's history. a record 2.3 billion, including 79 million specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mental health and suicide prevention. Our government will continue to partner at the national level with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders in mental health, suicide prevention and social and emotional wellbeing. We'll continue to work with communities and with Indigenous organisations to better design and deliver mental health and suicide prevention services that meets the needs of Indigenous Australians. Thank you for giving me the privilege of being here with you today and having heard some of the conversation while I was sitting waiting. I was quite taken by the depth of those questions and comments that were made. So congratulations to Professor Toombs, LivingWorks Australia, and all who've been involved in the launching of this vital program. It gives me great pleasure to launch your program, and I'd like to thank all Indigenous trainers for their dedication to their communities, and I wish you all the best, and I want you to take care in the work that you do to ensure that you also look after yourself in providing the levels of support and intervention. Congratulations to every person who is online, but particularly to our people at the community level for their involvement and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate you being here today and to officially launch the program. And I think given what you said there at the end, it's only fitting that the last word for the launch today, that we again go to one of our Indigenous trainers, representing the social enterprise model, to Dean Bayliss, who is going to say the last word for our launch. And then for anyone who joined us a little bit late that didn't get a chance to see the very short I-ASIST video, we're going to play that again for you. If you've seen it, we enjoy it. Thank you for coming, but over to you, Dean.
Thank you, Shane. So firstly, what a privilege it is to be here and share space with you all today in such a grand scale. The panel discussion with these leading community leaders reminded me when I engage communities and I sit with elders and we sit and have yarns, and elders, I come back to this one talk I had with this elder and his words, and he said to me, as we grow wise, we become leaders, and our innate protective factors of connection to culture, country and community are providing the resilience to be able to guide our youth who struggle early to navigate life. Now, we're accountable for what we do. We're all equally accountable for what we don't do. So my name's Dean Bayliss. I'm a Gomeroi man. I'm proudly meeting you today on Rudgery land in WA, New South Wales. HealingWorks was, as I said earlier in the panel, was founded on the social enterprise model, proudly supported by Hunter New England Central Coast Primary Health Network, LivingWorks, and guided us to start our business. And from there, we've got our own funding, and we've been able to provide support in communities and build up the capacity to get trainers on board. Our organisations address a basic unmet need and support solutions to a social problem throughout the community, serving and mentoring approach, and resulting in a positive in social and economic impacts within Indigenous communities. So as sustainability is at core of our work, HealingWorks Australia is a social enterprise. As we discussed, this means we seek these funding opportunities for Indigenous people to become trainers of our various programs. And as Tom Brideson discussed, this is the missing link and sits right beside mental health first aid. So we provide these services with extensive support and mentoring to ensure success, to provide sustainability way past any funding, and for important community education. This will be consistently available in communities and delivered and led by community. So I just want to discuss, it was an amazing contribution going forward for closing the gap, and Minister Ken Wyatt mentioned it earlier in some comments before. So let's close the gap on the current ability to ensure this unique I-ASIST knowledge and skills to save lives by suicide are widely accessible and provided to all Australians, Indigenous communities. Let's close the gap on grief, loss, pain and shame that thrives within the disparity of evidence-based Indigenous specific suicide interventions that are funded and commissioned within suicide prevention. Let's close the gap on accountability. We continue to hear reports that our Indigenous people account for twice the deaths of non-Indigenous. It's currently recognised our Indigenous youth account for the highest Indigenous youth death rates by suicide in the world. our youth, our future. They're more willing to take their lives than continue to experience wave after wave of grief, loss, pain and shame that Australia today has created and continues to expose them to. Our youth are not accountable for their own safety. It's time. It's time to take accountability.
So my daughter's name is Pia, and Pia was 32 when she died. Mental health was a tough one, and I didn't have any ASIST training exposure. If you've got asthma, you know where to go. If you've got diabetes, you know where to go. But if you're in trauma and suicide thoughts, you have nowhere to go. The others may take your life in time, but this one takes your life in moments.
Hi, my name's Maree Toombs, and today I'm very proud to introduce you to a world-first Indigenous-led suicide intervention training program. This program came about through an NHMRC grant that we spent the past 4 years working with communities nationally and have landed on this amazing program that we call I-ASIST. I-ASIST came about through initially getting some funding through the National Health and Medical Research Council to look at a way to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to reduce the rates of suicide.
The big issues that are confronting us is the high rates of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide.
We understand that our mob are dying by suicide.
It was during my time doing the non-Indigenous version of I-ASIST that I became very, very aware that my own brother was at risk of suicide. Through doing the program, I was actually able to conduct an intervention on him, and it gave me the tools that I needed to understand what to do. Once I realised the capacity of this program, I bugged the daylights out of LivingWorks, and particularly Shane Connell, to see if we could work with this program in Aboriginal communities.
At LivingWorks, we are incredibly proud of the development of I-ASIST. Not only because of the life-saving skills that will be able to be delivered for communities across Australia, but because I-ASIST is truly co-designed and community-led.
We took the program into multiple communities across Australia, and we spoke to the framework of the program, which is really intuitive to the way that we do culture.
It was on a level that they totally knew and could relate to.
There's Indigenous leadership, it's grounded in Indigenous knowledges.
I-ASIST enables skills to be taught in a culturally safe and inclusive environment. It teaches the skills to save lives.
I-ASIST is designed for Indigenous people or those closely supporting Indigenous people through its unique protocols and cultural nuances. It provides a vastly better learning experience, resulting in positive engagement.
It speaks of story, it speaks of deep listening, and it speaks of empowering the individual and the community to work together to keep somebody safe from suicide.
The education, it gave people the knowledge of being able to ask, like, are you okay? Of notice that you're different to how you normally are.
I think once people know when you're either a trainer or trained in this, you're then a person that they can go to.
It's really taught me to be able to use my ears and listen, and to be able to sit in people's pain and be able to respond in an effective manner. And I have been able to save a number of lives so far.
When you're in that moment with somebody and you're not sure of what to say or what to do this training, because it will help you and it will help save lives.
See, I-ASIST is a tool that we can take back to our mob and take back to our community and train them to be confident and to be ready to provide an intervention to prevent suicide.
The wonderful thing about this program is it's the first of its kind in the world, but two, it's a social enterprise model.
It will create employment opportunities for Indigenous trainers to be able to work within their communities, to be a resource in developing these skills.
This program is a celebration of the efficacy and self-determination that Aboriginal peoples have, and how we, when we come together collectively, are able to do great things.
We applaud the continuation of I-ASIST, and it will make a difference for our communities.
It provides a holistic way to approach suicide so that one day we can say that we have zero suicide in our communities.
Thank you, everybody.